Hey everybody, I'm going to take this moment to peel back the curtain a little bit on some movie making magic, bust a myth or two, spoil a mystery. What you're watching right now is not the first take. This is take number 7. And what you're watching right now, me talking about how many takes it has taken to get this done, was not my first idea when I plotted out what this episode was going to be about and how I was going to do it. And in fact, this bit of film is the last thing that I am filming before I sit down to edit the whole thing together. Why? Because that's how introductions are actually made in writing. I'll explain how after the theme song. I know I look calm and collected on the outside, but on the inside I have a lot of fear. For example, my very real fear that the Large Hadron Collider is going to accidentally create a black hole that will suck us all in. My much more reasonable fear that nobody's ever going to watch these videos, and if they do, they're never going to take my advice and become better writers. But when I think about myself as a writer, my biggest fear is this: the blank document. Or if I'm doing it more old-fashioned, the empty page. Any writer in the world is going to tell you that starting is the challenge. Beginning your essay, beginning your novel, beginning your short story, even beginning your poem, there's fear. Real writers power through that. And in fact, I'm going to let you in on a secret. Well, I say secret because over the years I've taught thousands of students and none of them have ever seemed to know this going into my class. Professional writers will tell you this all the time. Just ask them. The secret is you don't write your introduction first. Good writers, particularly good writers of nonfiction, write their introductions last. In fact, hang on a second. I got an example for you. I was using it to prop up the camera, so now I have to slightly adjust the camera. But this book, Educating Milwaukee, it's by a friend of mine, Dr. James Nelsen. He teaches history here in Milwaukee. And earlier today, I sent him a message and I said, Dr. Nelsen, can I ask you a question? When, in the writing process, did you write the section called Introduction? And he said, I wrote it at the end, like most people do. So why write your introduction last, or at least later? 3 reasons. First, if you start with the parts that you know, the parts that you understand, the parts that you're excited about, you're much more likely to produce a quality product. For example, I'm just going to throw something out. You've been assigned to write an essay that somehow reflects your cultural heritage. Okay? Writing an introduction for that seems like a chore, right? What would you do? My cultural heritage is blah, blah, blah. Okay? But if you find something else that really gets you hooked, and it might be one of the last things chronologically in your essay once you turn it in, but you're writing about your traditional dance or the dinners that you always had at grandma's house or something that stokes your interest, you're going to turn out a better product. You're going to write a better essay. So starting where you're strong is reason number 1. Reason number 2, you may not actually know where to start. There's a fantastic writer that I like to use a lot with my students because she writes so well about writing. Her name is Anne Lamott, and I'm going to put this quote up here. She said, "The difference between a writer who toughs it out and one who doesn't is that you push through the parts where you know that you've just written 7 pages when all you're looking for is 1 short paragraph." Now, that's from a fantastic interview she did. I'm going to link it in the description below. A lot of times we say that one of the biggest reasons to write is to write to learn something. And when you force yourself to write, even if the good stuff is on page 7, you learn. You go through that process of figuring out what it is that you wanted to say. Reason number 3 for writing your introduction last is that even if you think you know where you're going to start, even if you have the perfect image in mind, the perfect opening question or whatever, you may write yourself into someplace different. Because here's the thing about writing, is that it's never finished. You could be done with a draft, but there's always more you can do. I liked this quote by Shannon Hale. She says, "I'm writing a first draft and I'm reminding myself that I'm simply shoveling sand into a box so that later I can build castles." She's talking about exactly that idea, that as you're writing, your writing shifts and changes, and where you go with it might be someplace you didn't expect to be. You get to the end of a draft and you realize it's not what you expected. No big deal. You can work with that. You've got words on a page that can be rearranged. You've got sentences within there that were really good. You've got sections that were really good and you want to use. So don't think about the page. Don't think about the Word document or the Google Doc as an end product. Think of it as a process. And in that process, you're discovering and you're rearranging and you're hurting absolutely no one. Now, this is the episode where we talk about writing introductory paragraphs, so I will also say this. Some of you have been taught bad ways to begin essays. And here's what I will say about that. If you've got a particular strategy that gets you writing, even if it's terrible, I would rather you use that strategy and go back and revise. And I'll give you an example. There are middle school teachers out there. I don't know who they are. I don't know where they teach. I don't know if maybe you had one of them. But there are middle school teachers out there who teach students to begin every essay with, "Hi, my name is..." That's awful. You can't get to high school and college and start an essay or start a piece of writing with, "Hi, my name is..." I mean, look, your name is at the top of the page where you typed it. You don't need to start with it in your first line. One thing I really hate is starting with a terrible general question, like, have you ever thought about your culture? Yeah, or no, or what does that matter? There are times when you can write a good question to begin an essay, or a good question to begin a story, a narrative. But something like, have you ever thought about? That's not a good introduction. That's a bad hook. Hook is another word for your introduction. There's also, you provide a dictionary definition. Can't stand that. Culture, according to the American Heritage Dictionary, means blah, blah, blah. Again, if that's your way of getting sand into the box so you can make a castle later, fine. But recognize that that's just a pile of sand, and you got to keep working on it. It's getting a little noisy here outside. There's some guys over there, yellow vests, flamethrowers. Literally, there's flame. So I'm going to head indoors, and we're going to talk about good ways to start your essays. Now, if you were paying attention to episode 1 of this series, you know that "Hi, my name is" a bad hook because it's inapt. Not only in the sense that it is inappropriate, but in the sense that it doesn't authentically consider the audience for that piece of writing, the purpose behind that piece of writing, and the tone that you as an author want to take. They fail because they're robotic. You know, Wikipedia defines culture as blah, blah, blah. There's nothing human about that. I care about what you write. I care about what you think and what you believe. And almost any audience will too. If you have an authentic voice, people are going to care. Now, again, hashtag warning. You are going to have teachers who say, this must be your introduction. You must begin with a question. You must begin with whatever. And absolutely, there are different forms of academic writing that have very different requirements. A reflective essay on your cultural identity is very different from a lab report on sciencey things with the beakers and the chemicals and the explosions or whatever. You have to make your introduction fit what is happening in the rest of your essay. So how do you do that? I guess that's the big question. How do you make that introduction happen? Whether you write it first or, like real writers, write it last. So here's another secret. Call it Bullock's second rule of introductions. Not only do you not have to write the introduction first, your introduction doesn't have to be the introduction. There's a Latin term that we use to describe usually fiction or television shows or movies. It's called in media res. I'm spelling it out for you down there, and I'm going to put a link to something, probably to Wikipedia, because, you know, Wikipedia defines in media res as a great way to get your point across. But what it really means is, like, you start in the middle of something. So if you are writing a reflective essay about your culture, for example, you might start in the middle of a dinner, or even the end of a dinner. You know, when my mother passed me grandma's apple pie, I felt blah, blah, blah. Okay? That's where your authenticity and your voice comes through. There's a great writing teacher, Michele Dunaway. I'm going to put a link to her down in the description as well. But she's got this. She says this. I often ask my students, were you bored writing this? They usually say yes. To which I respond, then your reader is bored too. If you try to make your introduction sound like you are a robot, then the only thing I, as your teacher, or whoever your teacher is, will think about while reading that introduction is, oh my God, not another robot. But if you write what you write on purpose, and you bring authenticity to that introduction, then you're going to be fine. You're going to do great. I want to close with something for the people who are still stuck. I can say all I want to. You've got to be authentic. You've got to be true to yourself. You've got to write what you write on purpose. And there are going to be those of you out there who are kind of like, I don't know what that means. And I get it. Okay? That blank page scares me too, remember? There are some things that you can try. There are some quote unquote formulas that, while not making you sound like a robot, can get you from point A to point B, where point A is a blank page and point B is the first body paragraph where your writing can kind of come to life. For example, you can use the funnel approach. You can just Google funnel introductory paragraphs. I'm displaying an example of one. I'll put a link to a couple of good ones in the description below. So you start with a wide statement, very, very general. Every day at my high school, 1,000 students get fed lunch. There's nothing factually wrong about that. It doesn't jump off the page as being crazy, but it does feel authentic and it kind of sets a tone. Then you can get more specific. These students stare into the face of dry mashed potatoes, runny chicken teriyaki, green beans that were never green in their lives. Then you can finally get to your thesis statement. So you've gone from something very wide and general to something specific, but then you can get to a thesis like, my school needs to consider serving fresh, local, well-prepared meals. You've got 3 sentences there that feel authentic, but that follow a funnel formula. Right? If you're looking for something a little bit more specific than a metaphor about a funnel, there are all kinds of templates, fill-in-the-blank templates, literal fill-in-the-blank templates, some better than others. I highly recommend the book They Say, I Say by Graff and Birkenstein. It's available from just about any reputable online or in real life book retailer. But what it has in it is literally fill-in-the-blank templates. These are 2 college professors who realize that kids are coming out of high school and they don't know how to engage in academic argument or work using academic language. And so you get a template like this one, which is fantastic. And you fill in the blank with what you are writing about. And that is a tremendous first sentence. You can also use a sentence that you're imitating. If you go back to episode 6 of series 1, imitation is the sincerest form of learning. I went through about a half a dozen sentences that I like to have my students imitate. All but one of those sentences was the introduction or the first sentence of the work it was taken from. You know, all happy families are alike, each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. You can turn that into something amazing, right? You could turn that into every great meal at a restaurant is the same, but every terrible school lunch is terrible in its own way. I even teach a template when I teach literary analysis, so students can have something in their first line. And this one, I am ashamed to admit, it feels a little robotic, but it definitely gets to audience and purpose, even gives you a little bit of wiggle room in tone, because the template goes like this: author's name, comma, a positive phrase about them. If you don't know what a positive phrase is, I'll link to something down in the description. Uses a technique, one particular technique, the technique that you want to write about in the title in order to show the theme. So for example, you could take something very dry, like Langston Hughes, a Harlem Renaissance poet, uses imagery in his poem Mother to Son to show the difficulty of being African American in the middle of the 20th century. All right, there's nothing that leaps off the page with personality about that, but let's take another whack at it. Langston Hughes, tired of being kept away from the American dream, uses devastating imagery and sad dialect in his poem Mother to Son in order to show that one generation has no hope left to pass on to the next. See there, okay, all right, I admit doom and gloom, but we are talking about Jim Crow America. What are you gonna say? But personality comes through there. It still has audience and purpose, but the tone is much more personal. It's much more angry or sad. And that makes it a better introductory sentence than Langston Hughes was born in 18 whatever in Missouri. I don't need to know when he was born. I want to hear what you think of his poem. Speaking of hearing what you think, that's the end of this episode. You can leave me comments or additional questions down in the comments below. We're going to move on in a relatively traditional order here to body paragraphs for episode 3. So I'll see you for the next one. Hang on a second. Slide this out here. Here's a book. Well, that would make the blooper reel.